Good afternoon. Today's video, or this month's video, I haven't uploaded a video for a month or more, and I must apologise for my very last upload, which was a version of this talk called The Conditions of Our Collapse, the imminent economic collapse, the imminent total economic collapse of New Zealand along the lines of the Soviet Union and of Argentina. And we remember from both those examples there was a two-stage collapse, first 10% and then 10% remaining of that, so that you ended up with 1% of former value in Russia and something very similar in the noughties for the early 21st century for Argentina. It is very clear that the population basis for the Russian collapse is preeminently a feature of it. It has completely failed in almost 20 years now to recover. It still remains at 1 or 2 or possibly 3% of former value, despite all the resource extraction, the oil and the minerals that have been enabled to be developed by the oligarchs and so on. Will that happen here? And is there another place for another set of thinking apart from communism, socialism, and democracy, capitalism? I think there is. That all these concepts to me are obsolete, null and void. They have almost no meaning in the modern world. So I invented myself a new taxocracy, a new to hold back the socialistic destructions of our economy, and a population economy to hold back classical economics and capitalist oligarchies' destruction of our economy. We must have a constitution with a profit margin built into it. Otherwise, a constitution, since politics is all about the money, is a meaningless piece of paper if it doesn't have tax rates and limits to taxes for government built into them, and a profit margin also, as you will see in my example about taxes, the tax limits and taxocracy. You look at those videos and you will see and understand what I mean by those things. You could also look further at my open letter to the New Zealand Prime Minister, where there's a technical analysis of the thing that really drives a prosperous economy, which is the intergenerational population dynamic. That the tall, thin column above is held aloft, best and in guaranteed fashion by a very broad skirt. And I mean that probably in every possible sense of the word, even with joking aside, as people have made by the use of that term. So my apology is for the poor sound quality of the previous upload. I hope I do not have the same fault in this issue. It seems to me that we are not only in the midst of a crisis, some kind of large-scale cyclic crisis, but to me the cycle of this crisis doesn't exist. It is historical. It is one-off. We have volunteered for the Black Death, the demographic effect of the Black Death through Abortion, Contraception and Sterilisation Act of 1972. So we can see that after one generation, 40 years, that all the downside of that decision at that time is now upon us. And that is what has been accumulating through the economic crises throughout the world at this time. Now, the lifetime earnings of one person is approximately, in constant 2010 or 11 dollars terms, is approximately $4 million. Approximately. And this is not give or take a million. This is pretty well bang on. 3.5, 3.8, something like that. 4.2, something like that. That's what it is, or that's what it will be if you looked at it. It varies perhaps a little according to how you measure it, and it probably varies over different economies, but I am dealing with the signal case, the salient case of New Zealand. Now, what prompted this video was a certain debate I had at Victoria University. I was hoping not to raise that issue there, and yet it came up. So my first outing and reply to that developed the argument further. So I thank very much the originator of that debate. It is not about wanting life, because if I want to get rid of my girlfriend and poison her, it's not a matter of whether I wanted her or didn't want her. It's a matter of whether I poisoned her. It's a matter of murder. It's a matter of death. If I don't want, if you know, somebody, a woman doesn't want her boyfriend and she shoots him, it's not a matter of whether she wants him or doesn't want him, or what he did or did not do. It's a matter of her shooting and killing him. It's a matter of murder. And so it is with children and babies and the legislation for the womb. I would say that a conscience vote has no protection of privilege in moral philosophy. But how could you sue a man for the loss of $2.3 trillion? And it's mounting. That's right, you heard it correctly. $2.3 trillion. 400,000 since 1972. And do not tell me that they would have been aborted anyway. No, they would not. They are distinctly missing. Despite the fact that our population has grown slightly, but not enough, as you will see. In this time, the birth rate of 1972, the live birth rate of 65,000 live births, was only reached a couple of years ago. So that's almost 40 years at a level below the live birth rate of 1972. So there were losses, big losses. 400,000 at $4 million each is $2.3 trillion. Now, Mr. Key has recently borrowed $35 billion, and he's been spending up large to get himself over this current election. But how on earth would such a sum be sufficient to paper over the cracks, a crack as large as $2.3 trillion? It's impossible. He cannot do it. It will not happen. It may just hold for this election, but after this election, all hell will bottom out and break loose. The lot will happen to us. The same collapse I'm predicting as in the Soviet Union, the collapse of Russia, which we have seen has struggled to get nowhere in 20 years and has been basically raped and pillaged by the oligarchs. The social welfare system completely collapsed and evaporated. Their military strength dwindled away to almost nothing. And the longevity of their people dropped in about 3 years in those early stages from 62 to 59. So millions of old people died and vulnerable people died at that point. Millions. Not a word is spoken of it. You have to have millions to affect the longevity statistics that much in so short a time. You have to have massive numbers of deaths for that to have occurred. It just doesn't happen unless people are starving to death, freezing to death, or dying of minor ailments. Don't tell the environment, our nature, that we're green and temperate. It cannot happen here. We've got oil in abundance in the ground. Yes, but where are we getting the loan money to develop it? And all the profit from all the oil and all the resources and all the mining will not equate for a fraction of that loss, $2.3 trillion. 10 billion here and 20 billion there will not make up $2.3 trillion in a very great hurry. In fact, it won't make it up at all, ever. So resources are not the issue. Immigration is not the issue. If you have immigrants come into the country, the price of the property rises. You have to pay more for those things. The price of all kinds of other things rise up, but the vulnerable cannot afford it in a collapsed economy. And you have an adult move in over the road, almost literally in some cases, competing with exactly the same kind of business that you've got. So your business is automatically and immediately cut in half, no matter what it was and what it could be. It's cut in half when there's a competing business exactly like yours from an immigrant adult over the road. And with immigrants coming in, you never know, you cannot plan, you never know when this might happen. And it happens a lot more than you think. So there are upsides and downsides, but mostly a horizontal movement. There is no forward movement as a whole, on the average, overall, from immigration. It's a non-runner. It's deceptive, it pleases the public, but the public needs to look deeper than that. The only dynamic is between the column and the skirt, and you have 20 years, not immediately competing with an adult immigrant, but you have 20 years of your own homegrown children and babies before they will compete with you. So even an average businessman can build his business skills or her business skills. And don't tell me that this is detrimental to the advance of women. I know a woman who's an associate professor at Victoria University, and she has 10 children. Don't tell me that they would all be living on the benefit. Melissa Clark Reynolds was born in such a household, and she's a multi-millionaire. And John Key himself was born in such a household, and he too is a multi-millionaire. Don't tell me that they are unwanted. We desperately want them. We want to love them. The status of children will rise if you kill your children. The status of the children goes down, and then you get all the child molesters. Does abortion cause child molesting? Abortion is child molesting. And if the state puts a stamp on, what really is the moral forbiddance when the state murders children? There isn't any. It doesn't exist. So you get the sexualization of children, you get the molestation and abuse of children, and the status of children is lessened the more and more we desperately need them. And then we begin to artificially divinize them, that is, non-demonize them, the opposite, to compensate. It doesn't quite work. We adore and worship the little children, where in actual fact they should be dealt with in a very practical and straightforward manner. That is the most sane and best and rational way to deal with children. Not to answer to their every want and every whim and every need. That they are spoiled children. Their demands are too high, their expectations are too high, and they commit suicide in droves with the collapse of that expectation. And that's exactly what we do see. These are observations from a lifetime of looking around. That is why you need the wisdom of the old to govern us with ideas, and maybe really to govern us in fact. Because I'm keeping back my solutions to this problem. You will not like them. You probably wouldn't vote for them. So we're not hoping to attain the right governance of this country through voting or democracy. That won't happen. The cost of these children is about 60, 70 or 80 billion dollars a year, every year. That's the equivalent of 3 or 4 Christchurch earthquakes every year. But with an earthquake you get the chance to rebuild. With a dead baby you don't. Because we didn't have them, we won't have them, and we did not replace them with another one later on. It just didn't happen. Selfishness ruled the roost. This is statistical genocide. It is the greatest loss of human life in human history. It's like volunteering for the Black Death all over again. And who would be so foolish as to do that? But that is what we have done. It is the death of the economy. It's the death of politics. It's the death of the human race. If it can't support itself from within itself, it dies at every level: cultural, intellectual, economic, political. Human rights are set aside. All the refinements of feminism and the green movement, they're set aside. We can't afford them. It just doesn't happen. It's the death of our country. We become beholden to other countries, other financiers and so on. It's the death of our independence. It's the death of our freedom. We may need to volunteer for a severe loss of huge quantities of our freedoms and our so-called human rights in order to build up the basics again of a real economy, a real population economy. We must destroy ecofeminism by every means possible. Anything must be put in operation. Anything at all. Absolutely nothing is forbidden us in this effort to destroy a set of philosophies that have worked to do nothing but to destroy us. European peoples, for instance, the most advanced liberal persons in the world who have most volunteered for this, were once 20% of the human family. We are now 8%. In 30 years' time, we will be 3%. And 30 years beyond that, at this rate, we will be 1%, having about the status of the Inuit in the world affairs. And who takes too much notice of them, worthy as they might be? Thank you. This is my point. We must destroy that which is destroying us, for it is good. There are tough times ahead of us, and heavy and hard and difficult things must be done. And not too many questions asked. Mistakes will be made, but we must go ahead of a dutiful, beautiful and prosperous response. It's the only way to have any future whatsoever, because it's dying in our hands, it's dying in our fingers, it's dying in our life right now. Good night, New Zealand. Let's hope it's not the end. Let's hope we do not become just a colony of someone else's whim, of someone else's idea, of someone else's politics and agenda, of someone else's economy. We must take back our own economy and create our wealth in our own bedrooms and on our couches and in the backs of cars and on grassy knolls in parks under a right structure of married desire, of permanent relationship and patriarchal male order. It's the only way forward. The matriarchy has failed. Death to feminism.